You know what really sucks? An awesome looking game is announced, it's marketed to breaking point, a hype train gathers steam, only for its release to be a disappointing damp squib that alienates its entire fanbase. #watchdogs, #aliens colonial marines. Similarly galling is when an established franchise releases its latest entry only for it to be a squeaky fart, like the squeakiest of farts that was Mass Effect Andromeda, or Ass Effect Andromeda, if you will. But it's not all reason to despair, because there is actually another side to that coin. That lovely surprise we all get when a game that no one expected to be any good turns out to be a new classic. Sometimes developers can just pull it out of the bag, restoring our faith in the medium just as we were feeling resigned to accepting more Call of Duty sequels and loot box riddled EA crap. Whether it's a new IP that sounded poor on paper, a surprisingly solid movie tie-in, or a game that finally escapes its franchise's less than favourable legacy, there are plenty of games that give us that warm, fuzzy feeling in the sea of disappointments. I'm Will for WhatCulture, and here are 10 brilliant video games that surprised everyone. 10. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. While not a masterpiece, and by no means the greatest entry in the Assassin's Creed series, that honor will always be Black Flag by the way, Assassin's Creed Syndicate was awaited with dread rather than excitement. Unity, released the previous year, was rife with technical issues and dogged by microtransactions, and many considered it the death knell of Assassin's Creed. However, the release of Syndicate was a pleasant surprise for a weary fanbase. Its Victorian setting was exceptionally well realised, the protagonists were likeable and engaging, and combat had a much needed revamp. Hand-to-hand brawling was the order of the day, and fights frequently involved large groups of urchins in dust clouds of flailing limbs and broken teeth. Central assassinations were also vastly improved, and were much more rewarding for the player than in previous entries. Here, you're simply given a multifaceted location and the assassination target, and you're free to go about the kill as you see fit. Want to sneak up on the evil doctor and give him a classic hidden blade treatment? Perfectly viable. Want to pose as a corpse and then leap off the operating table and stab him up in front of a theater full of horrified onlookers? Also viable, and also way better. 9. Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Since Melbourne House's early Lord of the Rings text adventures released in the 1980s, the Lord of the Rings franchise has had a bumpy ride in gaming. The film's trilogy video game adaptations were, fun enough, but they were short, linear, and carried the odour of hacked-out licensed games. A slew of dry, real-time strategy games followed, and aside from the successful MMORPG Lord of the Rings Online, nothing lived up to the legendary franchise. That is until Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, an original story bridging the gap between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The game focused more on Uruks and their role in Mordor than the stories of elves, dwarfs, hobbits, and wizards. Quite the risk, considering the lack of depth the Uruks have been afforded previously. The risk paid off very well indeed, as the game's much-touted Nemesis system presented a nuanced hierarchy full of power struggles, lively characters, and that one Uruk who would hound you right up until your final confrontation at the Black Gate. It helped that the combat was both visceral and challenging, and made every battle with the endless army of goons feel intense and rewarding. Solid proof that an unusual focus and some narrative risks are worth taking still in that tired world of AAA gaming. 8. Mad Max. Despite releasing in 2015, the very same year as the release of George Miller's masterful Mad Max Fury Road, Avalanche's entry into the Mad Max mythology is not a direct adaptation or spin-off. It is, in keeping with Mad Max's ambiguous continuity, a separate chapter in the legend of the eponymous Mad Max, and it is absolutely head-crushingly awesome. Taking elements from the original trilogy of films and the newest entry alike, Mad Max places the player in a vast, hostile desert, a lot of which turns out to be a dried-out ocean floor. True to form, Max's overarching goal is simply to get his damn car back from Scarborough Scrotus. The gameplay focuses on vehicular combat, a genre which has barely seen the light of day since the late 90s, and executes this with incredible style and aplomb. Souped-up cars thunder across the wasteland, battling it out and exploding in showers of white-hot metal and glass, and the trail of destruction left behind is a sight to behold. The game's other elements also fit together very well, with hand-to-hand combat feeling weighty and muscular, and the game's central car customization mechanic allowing the player to construct their very own magnum opus of a vehicle. 7. Batman Arkham Asylum. 2009's Batman Arkham Asylum was an unexpected entry in Batman's gaming portfolio, and one which made a greater impact than could possibly have been imagined at the time. After a string of mediocre side-scrolling beat-em-ups in the 80s and 90s, and then a host of 3D games that ranged from forgettable to atrocious, there was no real benchmark. Arkham Asylum was released slap bang in the middle of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight saga, with the franchise enjoying a renewed level of appreciation a decade after Joel Schumacher's bad acid trip that was Batman and Robin. Rather than cash in on Nolan's universe, however, Rocksteady opted to take primary influence from the universally beloved animated series, bringing in veteran voice actors like Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill to voice Batman and the Joker respectively. The result was a game with exceptional atmosphere and design, and perfectly balanced gameplay. A well-crafted mix of methodical detective work and awesome free-flowing combat, which only got better as the series went on by the way, that has since been co-opted by almost every melee-focused gaming franchise. This is a game where you truly feel like Batman. Yes, it's a cliche, and yes, it's true, okay? You really feel like Batman. 6. Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. What happens when you take gaming's most beloved mascot and pair him with gaming's most irritating, obnoxious army of screeching sidekicks? And what happens when you pair them in a game whose whole genre is completely alien to both franchises? Somehow you aren't greeted with the stream of diarrhea one would expect from such ludicrous, insane, mind-boggling choices. Instead, you're treated to Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, an incredibly well-executed turn-based tactical RPG in the vein of the excellent XCOM Enemy Unknown. The gameplay itself is deep and well-balanced, requiring a lot of thoughtful strategy, but featuring special abilities such as bouncing off teammates to deal damage and traverse the battleground. These additions refer effectively to the Mario series' platforming roots, resulting in a neat blend of strategic action and acrobatic fun. The heightened mobility of both enemies and player characters promotes an aggressive playstyle, and the game therefore keeps pushing forward rather than getting bogged down. The game's design is also dripping with visual personality throughout, and its beautifully animated cutscenes convey a lot of satisfying physical comedy. The Mario Rabbid hybrid abominations are nothing short of genius in their portrayal, and of course you get to shoot Rabbids in the face with a shotgun. It's the closest you'll ever get to that minion murdering fantasy we all share. 5. The Mummy Demastered. Whether your favourite cinematic iteration of The Mummy is Universal Pictures' 1932 pre-code masterpiece, Hammer's macabre and atmospheric 1959 work, or the swashbuckling 1999 remake of the original is entirely up in the air. Nobody's favourite, however, is the truly forgettable 2017 Tom Cruise vehicle, which resulted in Universal's abandonment of their much-touted, upcoming Dark Universe. A tie-in video game was developed for The Mummy 2017 and somehow managed to not suck. In a bizarre inversion of the classic excellent movie, terrible game trend, The Mummy Demastered was a 2D Metroidvania reminiscent of the absolute best entries in the genre. Taking place concurrently to the events in the film, the player controls a prodigium soldier under the command of Dr. Henry Jekyll, and interestingly, when killed, is thrust into the body of a different soldier who then has to retrieve their equipment from their zombified former self. The game's pixel art is gorgeous, closely resembling later 2D Castlevania titles, and the gameplay shows a mastery of the genre, showing it a level of respect not commonly seen in tie-in works. 4. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The Resident Evil franchise has a fascinating cycle of death and rebirth over its nearly 25-year history. Its original trilogy on the PS1 was clunky but effective and tense, codifying survival horror as we know it. Just as it was starting to feel tired and repetitive, Resident Evil 4 dramatically shook up the formula with its campy, action-oriented romp, and massively influenced the action and shooter genres as a whole. Seriously, I love that game, I love it! But then they slowly started bleeding Resident Evil to death once more, with following expansions marking a steep decline, resulting in messy, cluttered gameplay, atrocious writing, and a total absence of, horror. How then could the series possibly recover? Once again, the formula was to be shaken up, taking influence from such titles as Amnesia and Outlast, a new wave of first-person survival horror titles low on combat and high on tense, high-stakes evasion of unbeatable enemies. Resident Evil 7 took those titles as claustrophobic first-person insta-kill horror and mixed in just enough combat segments to create a unique blend that was both tense and terrifying, as well as exciting and cathartic. 3. Wolfenstein: The New Order. The first-person shooter is king, and Wolfenstein was where it all started. Okay, so technically FPSs existed as far back as the early 1970s, but 1992's Wolfenstein 3D truly ushered in the genre with its ultra-violent action. Reducing Hitler to a pile of giblets was one of the game's defining moments. After a string of sequels that were decidedly lackluster, with the exception of 2001's fantastic return to Castle Wolfenstein, the series was floundering. World War II was a stale setting, with the industry turning its gaze to more modern locales, and Wolfenstein's bombastic tone was falling behind more nuanced, character-based storytelling. And then Machine Games struck gold with 2014's Wolfenstein: The New Order. Set in an alternate 1960 after the Nazis' secure victory, The New Order succeeded in both exhilarating Nazi head-stomping and tender, emotionally resonant character interplay. B.J. Blazkowicz, a man the size of a tank with the ability to dual-wield automatic shotguns, carried a sense of vulnerability, a tragic weariness at a war that he may never be able to win. His determination, however, resulted in gameplay that was louder and more exciting than ever. And there's a bit where you drown a Nazi in his own piss. Perfection. 2. Spider-Man 2. Until 2004's Spider-Man 2, video games had not been kind to the wallcrawler. After his early 2D outings, most of which were generic beat-em-ups and appearances in Marvel superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom-like games, the web-slinger starred into, pretty serviceable PS1 titles and a short, dull entry on the PS2 as a tie-in to Sam Raimi's 2002 movie. These 3D titles all made the same mistakes, setting too many missions in pokey indoor environments and relegating Spider-Man's most iconic trait, the web swinging, to a perfunctory automated method of getting from rooftop A to rooftop B to rooftop C. Oh, sorry, is the game still going on? I fell asleep holding the R2 button. But then Spider-Man 2 came along and kabow! Yes, this is how you do it. This is how you, yes, cliché, I know, feel like Spider-Man. Loosely based on the Sam Raimi sequel and this time set in a reactive, open-world realization of Manhattan, swinging around the city and living the life of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was front and center. The art of swinging between buildings and traversing the landscape was wonderfully implemented. Each web actually had to attach to an object, and further swings needed to be timed properly to maintain momentum and steer Spidey properly. It was endless fun and had us just swinging about thwarting random crimes for hours upon hours, and rescuing so many of that stupid kid's goddamn balloons. Just hold on to it, Timmy! Just hold on to the damn balloon! 1. Doom 2016. If Wolfenstein was where first-person shooters truly began, then it was Doom that propelled them violently and viciously to stardom. Such is its universal recognition, it was even referenced in Friends, and yes, that is the height of success. It's interesting that while Wolfenstein has spawned a large number of sequels, spin-off and reboots, Doom has had comparatively few. Doom 2, whilst a solid game, was essentially just more Doom. Very little had been done in terms of graphical or gameplay enhancements, and areas of improvement concerned the use of larger levels above all else. Doom 3, released 10 years later, was technically groundbreaking, but lifeless. Its simplistic AI and over-reliance on cheap jump scares in uninspired environments made for a game that was playable, but forgettable. As years passed, realistic military shooters such as Call of Duty dominated the scene, and storytelling took center stage. Was a franchise based on bombast and raw, aggressive gameplay, for the lack of a better word, doomed? Not on your damn life. Its fourth entry, simply titled Doom, ripped and tore its way into systems in 2016, treating players to a true blue update of Doom's original premise, to kill demons and never goddamn stop. With its unrelenting action, crushing industrial gent soundtrack, and visual stained red with fire and gore, Doom is a game so intense you'll feel both empowered and frankly exhausted. And there you have it, folks, 10 brilliant video games that surprised everyone. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at @uslideu. I'm Will for WhatCulture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.